how to draw a beagle. The reference image is linked in the description below. These eyes have a lot of highlights in them, so first let's start out with the outline and then kind of incorporate more of the coloring, but then make sure that you're leaving room for some of those highlights. You can also use a white color pencil to emphasize those highlights, but there is also a little bit of some purple in the highlights itself. And then in the color of the eye, you could see I used this etch tool to kind of etch in some of the details. And then moving on from left to right, because I'm right-handed, it prevents smudging. So I'm drawing many layers here because you want to make sure that you have enough layers going on. That way you can build up and add more detail later on once you have a good waxy coating. So I'm using a mixture between some greens, some browns, a little bit of some light blues in the highlighted areas. Having that mixture of colors is super important for a more realistic look. You also always want to draw in the same direction as the fur that you see in the reference image. And then once you have enough layers built up, you can move on to the next section. You can always go back and adjust if you need to, but let's move on to the next section here. This is the top of the ear, kind of the in-between the ear and the forehead area. So this area, just really go by the highlights the most. So you always want to leave room for the highlights, so kind of work on those closer towards the end. That way you can kind of incorporate more midtones to blend into the highlights itself. Beagles have a key feature on the forehead area. So around the eyes, there's a lot more white, and in the top of the forehead, there's more color to it. So definitely want to incorporate and pay attention to that feature there. So we're gonna add a little bit of some mixtures of purples, browns, and a little bit of some blonde tones, and then mix it with a little bit of blue and some greens in there. Once you have enough layers, you can start to kind of blend it all together by using a burnishing method with a lighter color. What that does is it makes a waxy coating on top, and then you can start to apply more detail afterwards. Basically removes the that sketchy look with the tooth of the paper showing through, not nearly as much this time. You can also use a variety of pink tones just to kind of incorporate some of those nice warmer colors to make the portrait look a little bit more alive. As you can tell, the first couple of layers have lighter colors, and then I start to implement more darker colors as I build up those layers. It's really important to make sure you have the nice undertones, so pay attention to the colors that you're seeing underneath all of that darker fur. Once you have those undertones going, then you can start to add more darker colors as you're building up those layers. And then you can use the lighter colors again to kind of burnish over the top of some of those mid-tone and even the darker colors itself too. Just be mindful that it might darken it or might lighten it up a little bit too much. And then for the second eye, it's pretty much the same method. Just make sure you got room for the highlights and even for a little bit of the white of the eyes. You can also see that there's some black kind of going around the outside of the eye. So I like to kind of draw a little bit more of that fur coming out before I move on to the other features. Now the white part of the around the eye itself, it definitely has a little bit of some gray in there. This dog is much older than just a regular beagle, so you could tell that the coloring is a little bit more faded and there's a little bit of some more gray tones, so some of the gray hairs and whatnot. Be mindful of that too. So if you're drawing a younger beagle, there's going to be a lot more vibrant colors being applied than this kind of beagle here. And then moving on to the nose here. So there's a lot of highlights and a lot of lowlights happening. Now the nostrils are always straight up black, so we won't have to worry too much about that. But I'm applying a little bit of some purples and some green tones in there just to kind of keep consistent with the rest of the colors, especially around the ears where it has that green tone. Now there's usually a lot of highlights below and above the nostrils, so just be aware of that when you're drawing other noses too. So there's a lot of texture that also happens in the nose, so make sure that you do leave a little bit of texture there. You may not have seen it, but I used a slice tool to create those little whiskers before actually drawing on top of it. So what that actually does is it creates an indentation, and then as you're drawing on top, you can see that it avoids that area. And then if it ever comes like a little bit more muddy, you can just clear it up by using the etch tool a little bit more. In the muzzle area, the fur doesn't have too much detail to it just because it's more white fur. A little bit more gray in there too. So you want to apply some blues, a little bit of some greens in there just to have that little bit of a contrast going on. And then still, once again, avoiding the highlighted areas until closer towards the end. That way you can kind of get it blended in between the midtones, the highlights, and the shaded areas. And then moving on to the mouth here. So there's a lot of fur, a little bit more darker fur going on underneath the nose here. And most animals actually have quite a bit of fur going on underneath compared to the rest of the mouth. So that's pretty consistent, but you definitely want to keep it nice and dark and sharp. And then still remembering to pay attention to the highlights and leaving room for those closer towards the end, because you can't actually draw white on top of dark like you can with paint. And then with the mouth here, there was a little bit of some teeth showing through, and I just tried to incorporate it, make it look as natural as possible throughout the mouth area here. It does look a little bit awkward, but once you kind of get fix it up a little bit more and just make it look a little bit more realistic by adding more layers, it does look a little bit better. And the teeth are a key feature to this actual pet, because there's always going to be key features to each pet, and you want to make sure you're incorporating those features. That way, when you are giving them to a client, or if it's your pet, it looks more like your pet than just some general animal that you got off the internet. Some examples are something like a spot on the head, or the tongue sticking out, or just, an extra gray whisker, things like that. Those are really important. And then moving on to the rest of the body, it usually goes by a little bit faster because the head has a lot more detail to it than the rest of the body. So this area I'm focusing on using some tan colors as well as some green, a little bit of some raw umber green colors in there. And then kind of incorporating more of the darker black and dark sepia colors while incorporating some blues and a little bit of purple just in more of the mid-tone towards highlight areas. So as you can see, I'm still leaving room for the highlights, and I'm going to work on that closer to the end, making sure I'm still leaving some of the white in there. But I never really leave just straight up white because I still want to be able to add detail. Nothing is ever just straight up flat white, especially when it comes to drawing animals. I hope that this video has been really helpful so far. If you are actually interested in drawing your own pet portraits, feel free to check out the program that I have. It's listed below, and it is a whole 8-week program where you can learn to draw your own pet portraits that includes highly detailed videos of drawing specific kinds of fur, different colored fur, as well as certain animal features. And then by the end, you get to draw an example of a pet portrait, and then the very last week you get to draw your own pet portrait, as well as ask questions along the way, just in case you are needing some help. But please check that out. That is linked below. And then moving on to the middle part here, it's a lot of white happening, so I'm trying to be very delicate and use lighter colors. So I'm using some warm grays and some cool grays together and just creating more of that texture. Now you could see that the angle of the fur is going in some wonky directions. That's very important. You want to have some natural looking type of fur. It's not just straight in one direction. So pay attention to that as you are looking at the reference image. And not all animals actually have, fur in all directions, but definitely key features when it comes to certain breeds. And then you can still use the slice tool to kind of etch away and make some little highlighted areas. Or you can use a electric eraser. It helps to kind of erase smaller, more detailed areas. Or you can use that even for just creating highlights in general. I don't say it very often, but adding whiskers is very, very, very important to drawing animals in general, because every single animal has some sort of whisker. If they don't, it just does not seem like, I don't think it's an animal, in my opinion, which is probably not true, but I definitely, for cats and dogs, there are whiskers, so you really want to incorporate both black and white whiskers. And just look at the animal and see where the white whiskers are and where there are black whiskers. Usually it's both or one or the other. If you're heavier handed, don't forget to draw a little bit lighter. If you're lighter handed, don't forget to draw a little bit heavier. It's super important to be mindful of that too, so that way you get enough saturation in the portrait itself. And we're coming close to an end here, so I really hope that this video was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Please do not forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments below if you have any questions or if you really enjoyed this portrait. Let me know, but thank you so much. I will see you in the next one.